The committee is now investigating whether the president and top aides used so-called burner or disposable phones to avoid scrutiny of their calls during that time. The logs do show several incoming and outgoing calls on the morning of January 6th, including from Rudy Giuliani and former President Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon. At 8:37 a.m., Trump spoke with Bannon, who sources say told him to call Vice President Mike Pence and urge him to block certification of the election. Trump later did phone Pence, failing to persuade him, but that call is not listed in the records.
Oof, there is some serious drama and some serious detail coming out of the select panel investigating the riots on January 6th. What they have learned based on internal White House documents that have been handed over to them by the National Archives is that on January 6th, the day of the Capitol riots, Donald Trump had a massive window of time, 7 hours and 37 minutes, in which he had not logged into any phone calls, official phone calls. And there is now some suspicion that previous accusations that he was using burner phones to avoid scrutiny could be proven as a result of the lack of official calls being made through the White House. So there might be use of things like burner phones. Maybe he used someone else's phone while making phone calls. But the idea of Trump not making any phone call at all in the time span of 7 hours and 37 minutes on January 6th is ridiculous. Of course, he was communicating with people. In fact, there are reports of 2 such phone calls that he had that day that were not in the official White House call logs. So let's get into the details here, because this is, in my opinion, the most interesting update on this investigation. Here's what we found based on CBS News and the Washington Post. CBS reported that the lack of an official White House notation of any calls placed to or by Trump for 457 minutes from 11:17 a.m. to 6:54 p.m. on January 6, 2021 means there is no record of the calls made by Trump as his supporters descended on the US Capitol. Now, since there's no record, you shouldn't be under the assumption that he made no calls. He absolutely did make more calls. We have more details on that. Let's watch the video.
As chaos engulfed the Capitol building on January 6th, President Trump spoke repeatedly on the phone with allies and supporters, some of whom urged him to put an end to the violence. But none of those calls are reflected in the 11 pages of those White House records for January 6th given to the House Select Committee. There is a massive 7 hour and 37 minute gap in calls from 11:17 a.m. to 6:54 p.m., which includes the most violent period of the attack. CBS News has confirmed at least 2 calls during the attack that do not appear on the phone log or the Daily Diary. One call from Trump to Utah Republican Mike Lee, and another call to Trump from House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who described it to Norah O'Donnell by phone as the violence was unfolding.
So again, those calls with Mike Lee and with Kevin McCarthy happened. They're not on the official White House call logs, meaning he made those calls or had those conversations in some other way, whether it was using a burner phone or using one of his aides' phones. Now, Trump is pretending to be stupid about all of this. This is his statement of denial. He says, quote, "I have no idea what a burner phone is. To the best of my knowledge, I have never even heard the term." But John Bolton, who of course was in the Trump administration and worked closely with him, made it clear that not only does Trump know what burner phones are, burner phones came up in conversations quite often in the Trump White House.
Yeah, so first of all, notice that Trump didn't even deny that he made other calls. He just said, "I don't know what a burner phone is." That's not a denial. Second of all, does he know what a burner phone is? Of course, it's like the billionth lie in a row. Yes, there are now officials like Bolton coming out and saying, no, we specifically talked about burner phones with Trump. He knows exactly what it is. But did you really need that confirmation? The guy's a pathological liar. So why is he lying? Well, there's this issue of presidential records. So the president is supposed to be making calls on the record, not on burner phones like a drug dealer. But that's a relatively minor law. He's broken it hundreds, maybe thousands of times. And of course, Democrats have trouble holding him accountable for massive crimes, let alone that one. No, what he's really worried about is what a judge referred to the other day, which was obstructing Congress. And so that is the very serious crime of trying to stop the certification of an election. And if you have evidence of him basically encouraging the violence against the politicians who are looking to certify the election so that they could put in the fake electors as Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon wanted to do, et cetera, and you have evidence to that effect, well, then they would be guilty of a very, very serious crime.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting because the few calls that are available, they're officially logged, and we know the details of those conversations. Those weren't great conversations to begin with, which calls into question just how bad the other phone calls were. The phone calls that were made in some other way and were not officially logged. And to your point, Cenk, in regard to Democrats failing to hold him accountable, look, Trump's been impeached twice by the House where Democrats had control, but was acquitted in the Senate both times because the Senate was controlled by Republicans. So I can see how Republicans have stood in the way of real accountability over and over again. But in regard to this particular investigation and the individuals who hold the power necessary to prosecute Trump or to go after him for these alleged felonies, it would really rely on Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, to do that. And it seems like he has been unwilling to really hold Trump accountable for his role in what took place on January 6th. Attempting to do this through Congress is ridiculous. They don't have the power to do that. The only thing that this select committee has succeeded in doing so far is getting federal judges to agree to force Trump administration officials to hand over the necessary documents to conduct their investigation. But I did want to get into some of the other details in regard to the phone calls that he did make. First off, let's talk about his conversation with Mike Pence on the day of January 6th. There was one call he had with Mike Pence that was not logged as an official White House call. Trump's final call with Pence is not listed in the call log, even though multiple people close to both men said that the call occurred sometime in the late morning before Trump headed to the Save America rally. During their conversation, Pence told Trump, quote, "When I go to the Capitol, I'll do my job and not block Biden's certification." And that enraged Trump, according to the book Peril. So that was widely reported after the book was published with these details. I do want to move on to some of the calls that we do know about, the official calls, and it's just amazing to me that this is already bad. So again, the calls that we don't have record of had to have been worse. The records show that former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, who said on his January 5th podcast, all hell is going to break loose tomorrow, spoke with Trump twice on January 6th. In a call that morning, Bannon urged Trump to continue to pressure Pence to block congressional certification of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. The documents obtained by the committee show Trump having several previously unreported exchanges on January 6th, including brief calls with Bannon and personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani that morning before Trump had a final call with Pence in which the vice president told him he was not going to block Congress from formalizing Biden's victory. The call to the vice president was part of Trump's attempt to put into motion a plan advocated by Bannon and outlined in a memo written by conservative lawyer John Eastman. And of course, that plan was to essentially replace electors with these alternate electors who were more favorable to Trump and would essentially hand victory to the man who didn't actually win the general election, Donald Trump.
Yeah, so even corporate Democrats like Representative Luria are now getting super frustrated with Merrick Garland. And so she said basically, do your job. And that was really surprising because establishment Democrats never turn on each other and they're usually uniformly cowards. And so I was very surprised to see that kind of frustration coming from the conservative wing of the Democratic Party towards Merrick Garland. So why is Merrick Garland doing what he's doing, which is basically aiding and abetting Trump and his top aides and protecting them from the law? Because that's what Democrats do. they generally always protect Republicans after they get into office. And he's running the same playbook. They're scared of what Republicans will say about them, and they're scared of what Republicans will do to them if they get into power, so they always leave them alone. And their cutoff line is the establishment, whoever's in the establishment and who isn't, right? So that's why Merrick Garland has actually issued an indictment against Steve Bannon, because Steve Bannon is considered not in the establishment. But when it comes to somebody like Mark Meadows, who was a former congressman and was the chief of staff for Donald Trump, he won't even agree with the House Democrats, and he won't pursue any charges. Forget the actual insurrection. We're going to get to that later in terms of how the legal proceedings would proceed. No, even for not testifying, for refusing a subpoena from the House, well, that's an automatic indictment. But nope, Garland, the head of the Justice Department for Biden, will not pursue it for Trump's top aides that apparently the Democrats think are still inside the establishment and inside the club. And the reason they're not pursuing it in the case of Trump is they're scared to death of Trump, again, because honestly, Merrick Garland's a coward. This is not hard. They try to overthrow democracy. If you don't do something about it now, they'll do it again, for sure. But he's too scared to do it. And he's scared of Trump. And the other thing is, of course, Trump was president. And my guess is the Biden administration is saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's take it easy on accountability of former presidents, because Biden one day might also be a former president. That's how the elite protect each other. That's what allows fascists like Trump and Bannon to take advantage of the system and the weakness within the system. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.